Bienvenidas, bienvenidos, bienvenides a otra de las actividades de esta 36ª edición del Festival de Cine de Mar del Plata, que es un festival sino una excusa para el encuentro. Y de eso se trata esta serie de entrevistas, de preguntas y respuestas que tenemos con los cineastas, las cineastas que han contribuido a la programación del festival con sus películas. En este caso vamos a hablar de una película maravillosa dedicada a la aventura. ¿Qué es la vida sin la aventura y el comienzo de la aventura, su espíritu y la búsqueda de la aventura per se? Y qué mejor que pensar la aventura desde el arte. De eso se trata un proyecto titánico, si se quiere, de alguna forma, llevado adelante por Stefano Kchunel, que está aquí, el director de la película, acompañado en este caso por Vittoria Fiumi. ¿Y cuál es la aventura? La de retratar la vida de Hugo Pratt, en este caso, en su época en Argentina. Hugo Pratt, maestro absoluto, una de las personas número uno del cómic mundial, de la historieta, comenzó su carrera aquí en Argentina, trabajando en sus años mozos y forjándose como artista, sin lugar a duda, de la mano de otro grande, uno de esos inmortales también como Pratt, llamado Héctor Germán Oesterhel. Juntos hicieron, entre otras cosas, trabajos inmortales como, los voy a leer para no olvidarme ninguno de estos, son pocos, pero por Dios, estos tres nombres: Sargento Kirk, Ticonderoga y Ernie Pike, obras maestras absolutas de la aventura, precisamente, cada una con su locación y su forma de entender la aventura. Y después la vida lo llevaría al señor Hugo Pratt a volver a Europa, donde empezaría a trabajar con Corto Maltés, el sinónimo número uno de la aventura, sin lugar a duda, y de la aventura de autor, que eso es lo más interesante. Pero para eso, para hablar de todo esto, está la película, y ahora vamos precisamente a hablar con sus realizadores sobre ello. Bienvenida, bienvenido, ¿cómo están?
Muy bien, gracias.
Bueno, es un verdadero placer, como decía, la película nos parece necesaria, y creo que es una de las mejores características que puede tener una película. Un documental, quizá más que una película de ficción, por la necesidad también de retratar esto. Y voy a empezar con una pregunta sencilla, pero absolutamente difícil. Stefano, ¿por qué Hugo Pratt?
Bueno, first of all, primero, perdón para no hablar español. I'm sorry, I really like, I understand Spanish very well. I did 2 documentaries in Spanish, but maybe there's a lack of words here. If I want to answer you very precisely, that would be very a shame for me not to be precise. And yes, your question, as you said, is very simple, at the same time very profound. And the truth is, every honest director will tell that they understand the why of why they make a movie years after making the movies. There is always a why before, and the real why comes up years later. But in this case, the why that is previous is very clear. When I was a kid, as many kids of my generation, I discovered the work of Hugo Pratt. That was the beginning of Corto Maltese. I was very young. I was something like 10 years old. So I didn't know exactly what was the artist behind the work, the man behind the work, not mentioning that this person had a life and that this life could interact with the comics that I was reading. But what I perceived as a kid, then I understood better growing up, is the kind of freedom. I would say that the word that to me, you talked about adventure, the other word is about freedom, is about space, a special kind of feeling that Hugo Pratt conveyed through his comics. And that's also for one very specific reason, since we're here for celebrating cinema. He really introduced the concept of cinema in the world of comics. It's not only action, it's not only words, it's also spaces, waiting, suddenly moving in another place that is unexpected. So for all this reason, it kind of entered my mind and was opening up my brain. And then year after year, I understood more about his comics and about his life. And so it was a dream for me to make sooner or later a documentary about him. And the whole thing started to make a very long story short, in the beginning of the 2000s, I was invited in Switzerland, where he left all the archives of his work, to make a small reportage for the Swiss television. I went there and I made it with such love that the people who were taking care of the heritage of Hugo Pratt said, oh, but why don't you do more? And little by little, I got involved with Kong, which is the company that now owns all the right on Hugo Pratt's works. That was the beginning.
Bueno, qué hermoso comienzo, sin lugar a duda, y estoy totalmente de acuerdo con lo que decís, la noción de la libertad y de los espacios. Es muy singular el trabajo de Pratt en el cómic, la historieta mundial, cómo empieza con la aventura más clásica, de la forma más clásica, en especial en su trabajo aquí en Editorial Abril, que después se transformaría de alguna forma en Editorial Frontera, y sería un punto de partida para millones de universos, lanzando millones de artistas, en un momento en que Argentina tenía esa capacidad tremenda de crear artistas de cómic, tanto en lo gráfico como en la construcción de guiones, ¿no? Y cómo esa estadía aquí lo definió él como artista de ahí en adelante, ¿no? Es algo muy interesante y creo que es uno de los principales focos del documental.
Yes, absolutely. I think, first of all, I think that the 12 years at last, maybe a little bit more, that he spent in Argentina from 1950 to 1962 are really key to the work of Hugo Pratt. But I think these are a decade that is key to the history of the comics. I think because comics, there is this, let's say, importance of the American production, which is, of course, very relevant and very gorgeous. At the same time, it's kind of pushing everything else aside. And one of the things that got left or forgotten was the importance of Argentina in this specific decade. I would say, and I discussed this with people who are much more expert than me in comics, because I'm not expert in comic, but I talked to them and I said, don't you consider that in this decade in Argentina, the concept of what we call now graphic novel really started, you know, because artists taking over, starting creating their own company. That's what Oesterrel did, trying to have a more critical view on the world, putting more emphasis on the role of the author. You know, the author is becoming very important. All these elements come into play in Argentina, and you know, there is this very important book published by La Escuela Panamericana de Arte in 1956, which was dedicated to Hugo Pratt. And that was the first book ever in the world concentrating on the world of an artist and kind of analyzing this work, but not only from a technical point of view, but also what it means, what it conveys, you know, seeing this as a piece of art. That was like it's like Marcel Duchamp, you know, taking down a pissoir and saying this is an object of art. Suddenly it's like saying, oh, wait, yes, there is action, there is drawing, but something is happening here. It's a form of art, you know? And I think in this, Argentina was really key in this decade, and Pratt kind of landed, you know, the funny thing, the joke is that he went to Argentina because he wanted to go to America, and he stopped in Argentina, but he found America in Argentina. And I think he created the graphic novel with all the Argentinian artists of that moment in this decade. Then afterwards, you know, celebration take place another decades in another place, but it's very unfair. So for me, it was very important so to get back to that reality.
Perfecto. Vittoria, ¿cómo llegás vos, independientemente de este trabajo, a Hugo Pratt? ¿Lo conocías previamente? ¿Conocías su obra? ¿O te interesó el proyecto y a partir del proyecto conociste a Hugo?
Okay, I knew Hugo Pratt. I'm originally Italian, and I mean, he's very well known in Italy as well as in Switzerland and in France, and I would say all over the world. And when Stefano came to me with this project, he had done a project before, Hugo in Africa. And then he proposed me to do the second episode, I would say, because this is a trilogy, and we are going to work on the next one too, together. And yeah, it was an adventure. We start together, and yes, it's and the film you are going to see is as a result of this adventure that we started together. And yes, so I knew Hugo Pratt, but also Stefano is really convincing when he's proposing a project, and he knew the subject so well that you couldn't say no.
Perfecto. Lo interesante es que están reviviendo la aventura a partir del registro y la documentación y la realización de las películas, ¿no? Están viviendo la aventura de la mano de Pratt, de alguna forma, ¿no es así, Stefano?
Absolutely. You know, Pratt, there is one thing he said in the last years of his life. He didn't know yet that his life ended quite early, you know, and but he said one important thing, because, you know, the whole concept, Vittoria said it's a trilogy. To make it short, it is 3 episodes. They focus on, the first one is his childhood in Africa. It's him becoming a man. The second one is Hugo in Argentina. It's him becoming an artist. And the third one, Hugo in Venezia, will be about Venezia and Switzerland. And it will be him becoming a work of art, you know, because suddenly he realized, even before knowing he was going to die, that the only way to survive was really to enter the history of art, you know, and he always kind of, he related always to the past, you know, he always went through the world to visit the graves or the signs of other artists that he admired. And he always paid tribute to a lot of artists he admired. Suddenly he felt like he needed to create, you know, this kind of value and to keep it there. And he said one important thing, he said, I allow everyone to follow on my work. You know, if you want to take my characters, draw them again, do whatever you want. But there's just one rule. Go back where I went to, travel, go there, live there, have an experience there, go there. And as he said, turn the stones, you know, to see what's underneath the stones. If you do that, then I'm okay with everything that will be done. And to me, that was really like a guiding line. So, of course, it was the same in Ethiopia, in Somalia, in Djibouti, and it was, of course, in Argentina. It was important for me, for example, and thanks also to Vittoria, I had the chance, you know, sometimes today to make movies, we have so little money, so little time, we have to rush through. My point is, when I work on a documentary, especially like this one, I work for years. And in 3 moments, we stayed in Buenos Aires for 6 months overall to make the documentary. So there you have the time to go there, turn the stones, find the people, find the documents, and really do this work, you know. And so on one hand, you pick the pieces, but you also try to bring also a new life, because you bring all these elements, and of course you see them from the perspective of today. So yes, it's a very adventurous, I'm incredibly grateful to be able to do this series, because when you work, when you walk in the steps of Hugo Pratt, unexpected things can happen. You know, you never know where these steps they take you. It's incredible.
Bien. ¿Cómo fue la aventura de estas visitas? No sé si también estuviste por aquí, Vittoria. ¿Y cómo fue producir una película desde la distancia, desde la presencia, la preproducción, todo el trabajo de campo? Contanos un poco sobre eso.
So Buenos Aires. For me, it was the first time in Buenos Aires when we came, and during the first trip we did just research, and it was, of course, the most beautiful part for us, because we were free. And so we went around and looked at places and did some research, location scouting. It was very, very beautiful. And we always went at the beginning of the year, so during the summer. And it was nice weather. And yes, we had fun, definitely, the first time. Then the second and the third time, we worked really, really hard with a team in Argentina. It it was not always easy in the way that, of course, rules are different. Time, hours of the crew, and I mean, many things for me were very, very new. But at the end, it worked out and very good. I have to say that Buenos Aires is really, I mean, it's surprising. There are so many crazy places, and Stefano can tell you more about. We really find some special places where to film. And I think the industry in Argentina is very well developed. So the crew actually were very, very professional. And I think this is because the cinema in Argentina is anyway well known around the world and also developed, I would say. So there are a lot of good professionals. Yes, and I think we have found the right places. But I mean, Stefano can tell you more about this. It was not easy to find. We had this idea of the Argentina of the 50s and 60s, and it was very difficult to find original places. So not so as we expected to be, not easy, I would say. And also Buenos Aires is very loud. We had a lot of problem with sound. I mean, we had to work for the interviews. We had to do them in a studio. And of course, when we could, I mean, we did actually avoid to do an interview or anything in the natural environment, because it was just very, very difficult to do it.
Sí,
sorry, I say something very technical, but
no, perfecto. Buscaba un poco eso, y es buenísimo que hayas hablado de algo que me parece que es clave. Buenos Aires es una ciudad muy ruidosa, aún lejos de la capital, de la gran urbe, aunque hay lugares muy reposados también, por supuesto, que es inmensa. Ahora, lo que me parece maravilloso de la película es que precisamente eso que decís que les costó mucho, para mí está absolutamente logrado el tratar de capturar la esencia de una Buenos Aires que ya no es. El propio Prat, cuando habla de Buenos Aires, que lo hace bastante en sus historietas, porque como bien decía Stefano, es alguien que vuelve a los lugares, los visita, los vive y los visita desde el conocimiento. Sus personajes visitan desde su conocimiento. Aquí tenemos Corto Maltés en Argentina, y Toda Media Luz, que es una historieta que se editó acá. Bueno, obviamente se editó casi toda la obra de Prat en su momento. Es aquí un nombre esencial para los que amamos la historieta. Y tiene mucho tiempo bajada de línea, ¿no? En lo que dicen, o sea, ideológica, política. Hay digamos, en Prat una idea muy clara de construir el realismo desde el lugar donde se está viviendo y capturar la esencia de cada lugar, algo que me parece que lo demuestra él, como bien decía Stefano, como un autor real y verdadero que va más allá de la simple idea de hacer una historia y hacer entretenimiento, digamos. Hay aquí un momento muy bueno donde con un amigo después de la vuelta de Corto Maltés, personaje sublime, de aventura, un marinero, que empieza su vida en la balada del Mar Salado, y de ahí en más conoce y se mezcla con un montón de personajes de Rasputín, a quien se les ocurre una lista interminable de personajes secundarios ricos y brillantes. Hay un diálogo que me parece genial. Su amigo le dice, después de muchos años de no verlo, le dice: sos un fenómeno, Corto. Llegás después de 15 años y te enganchás con tramposos, rufianes y proxenetas. Sos un sentimental. A lo cual Corto Maltés responde en algo que me parece que es Prat hablando directamente: sí, sentimental, entre rufianes y tahúres, mujeres alegres y dandis, escabio y ginger ale, me siento metido en la retórica del tango. falta solamente la vieja. Eso es escrito por un argentino, básicamente, pero además habla de algo que siempre tiene en claro Prat en su obra, que es la nostalgia como punto de partida, pero la nostalgia alegre, la evocativa. Esa Buenos Aires de los 50 está muy lograda en la película. Me gustaría, Stefano, que nos cuentes un poco eso, que desde el lado de producción Vittoria dice, no encontramos todo. Bueno, desde el lado de la visualización volvemos a esa Buenos Aires y les agradecemos que lo hayan hecho. Está logrado, Vittoria. Podés estar tranquila con eso.
Well, on that aspect, I can tell you there is always one big challenge when you work in a country that is not yours, is to be honest and understanding how much you want to capture the reality of the place, how much you can understand of the reality of the place, and how much you are projecting like a myth, you know? And but working with Prat, I think the deal is very clear, because Prat always said you have to tell the truth as it were a myth, you know, and a myth as it were a truth also. These are the two aspects he always said, you know. And so he really, for him, Argentina, specifically with the year, has become more and more like a myth. It was a country he knew very well, that was very linked with, you know, because of course he was married there for the first time, he had kids, and I mean, it's such a very tight connection. But at the same time, it's like a myth, you know, because he wanted to turn everything every time into a myth. So I think I had to respect that, and that was also manageable for me, because I tried my best to understand Argentina, to understand the history, to understand the places, to stay there. But there's always a limit to that. Of course, even though you stay 6 months, even though I grew up with also kind of a Latin American culture, still there are a lot of things you better not enter. And that was also one of my main concerns, because I really wanted to put the story of Hugo Pratt, the man, in the context of a decade that is very important for Argentina. So I had to find a balance. And in that, Pratt is absolutely great. It's a very beautiful guide, because as you said, he draws some lines that kind of tells you what's outside of the frame. You can imagine all the rest, but what is there in the frame is quite essential. So for me, that was a big challenge. For example, just to give you one example, which is how can you speak about Hugo Pratt in the 50s in Argentina and not having tango? At the same time, the idea of having tango, of a Swiss coming to Argentina and filming tango, is just so awful, you know? It's just the kind of thing you go, no, 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 no. And I said, no, okay, I will just avoid it, you know, I will not do. Then I had one idea, which was at the first beginning, we went to see some gay tango. That was very interesting, because then it brought back also all the origin of tango, the complexity of tango in the beginning. So not only the romantic one that we know, but the one where, you know, if a man would invite another woman that was not his woman, that would be seen like a very big insult, because that would have been so rude, so sexually innuendo, so that the men were dancing among each other in the beginning, but then now, so basically I was trying to find a way so that tango would not look very obvious. Then suddenly I was asking a lot of people saying, but you know, Pratt sang a lot, he made up a lot of songs. Is it possible that he didn't do anything in Argentina or in Spanish? And then, yes, someone came up and said, yes, there was this tango he always used to sing, you know? I said, he said, yeah, this tango called Cabecita de Cristal. And you said, but is there any recording, anything? No, nothing. So, but do you remember the song? Yeah, of course, because he sang it over and over. Every party would sing the song. And so basically I asked this person to sing the song, to repeat it. I found another person who could sing it. So I compared the version. I am musically trained. So I could kind of, because we had the lyrics written by Pratt, we could rebuild the song. But then I said, okay, we have a tango, but a tango doesn't exist until it's interpreted. You have to bring a soul. And then again, to make a long story short, because it's a very romantic word and stories become very layered. But the fact is, I was listening to recordings of the voice of Pratt talking about his life. And he said, yeah, tango for me in Argentina was the familia Maria Gomez, and especially Maria Gomez. And I couldn't understand. I couldn't understand the name he was mentioning. But then after a while, it took me like 1 year to understand he was saying something, maybe Mariano Farias Gomez. So I went Mariano Farias Gomez, but no, there's no Mariano, there is Maria Farias Gomez. I said, okay, maybe that was an approximation. So I took a contact with Mariam, and I told her all the story. And what she told me is that, yeah, Mariano was one of my brothers, you know, and all my family was making music except Mariano, who was the very best friend of Hugo Pratt. And so when I asked to sing the song, she was moved, and it was a very moving encounter, and said, yes, for my brother and for Hugo, I will sing it. And with her musician, she really brought the life into the song, you know, that becomes a tango suddenly. So then you have a song, not published, how would you say that, unpublished song, an existent song of Pratt taking life. Then again, so then you have a tango that you can put into the movie.
Es una historia maravillosa y un momento maravilloso de una película que tiene varios, y que entiende la sensibilidad de lo que se está contando y la esencia de vida, la necesidad de que la vida esté presente a la par del arte. Como bien decís, aquí Pratt formó familia, hizo amigos increíbles con los cuales sostuvo duelos artísticos, si se quiere, desde algún lugar, en pos de mejorar y todo eso, y eso está muy bien llevado adelante en el documental, donde escuchamos a la voz de Pratt y también escuchamos y vemos a el querido Giancarlo Giannini. No sé si nos pueden contar un poco sobre eso.
So, I think this should be told by me and Vittoria at the same time, because the fact is, the whole series of documentary is based on the voice of Pratt. It's like Pratt told by Pratt, and that's because his biographer Dominique Petitfaux recorded him talking about his life, and that was a big challenge, because it was very difficult to keep Hugo focused on topics. And so I used this taping, and I thought, okay, in the first episode, the figure of the narrator is very important in the comics of Hugo Pratt. And very often in the comics of Hugo Pratt, you don't know exactly who is talking. Sometimes there is there's a voice, and you don't know if it's the protagonist, suddenly it's the moon talking. And then no, it's the whale or a cat, or a voice coming from a poetry from a French poet. And then suddenly there is a narrator. Okay, so the figure of the narrator, which is cinematically speaking like a lesser figure, no? When you use a narrator in cinema, they will say, oh, you couldn't manage to do it with images. But in the case of the world of Pratt, narrator really plays a role. In the first one, it was a French actor who had known Hugo Pratt and had this kind of humor that was needed there. But in this case, I went to Vittoria and I scared her in the beginning, saying, listen, Vittoria, I want a narrator that has the same voice as Pratt. I want the people who follow the movie sometimes maybe to get confused about who is talking. Also, because I wanted to do what everything that Giannini says, it's based on what Pratt says or what we know he says, because I wrote also with I wrote the text with Marco Steiner, who worked with Hugo Pratt for many years, so he knows how we talked about things. And I said, I want an Italian actor who speaks French the way Hugo Pratt speaks, with the same kind of voice. And we ended up in Giancarlo Giannini. And that was a huge challenge, because, of course, he's one of the biggest actors, so also a big challenge for the producer to involve him. It's quite expensive to have an actor like this. But when we heard the result, I thought, okay, that was a challenge, but to me, that's so gratifying. That's so funny. So I don't know if Vittoria had the same fun as I had, but Vittoria.
No, I'm really, really happy about this choice at the end. And when I hear his voice and then I hear the archive, for me, it's just, that is the same. It's the same man talking to the public. So that was the main thing for this choice.
And of course, it was a pleasure to have Giancarlo Giannini there, telling all this story. It was one of these moments that I think Prat would have enjoyed, you know, because also he makes a lot of jokes. You know, when you work with Giancarlo Giannini, it's like 90% jokes and 10% of time he reads the stuff. So it's also difficult to keep focus, but it's so funny.
Muy bueno, sí, es muy buena su participación, sin lugar a duda, y pasa mucho eso, ¿no? No sabemos quién habla, quién nos habla, y poco importa en un punto, porque estamos metidos dentro de esa historia. Una historia en la cual, más allá de algún roce hacia el final, es indivisible la presencia de Héctor Germano Oesterheld, creador del Eternauta, creador de Morcinder, bueno, un montón de personajes que también trascienden al cómic y son realmente parte de la historia del arte universal. Oesterheld es alguien muy importante y trascendente en la historia argentina, por suerte hay una memoria viva de su trabajo también, y me parece que está muy bien también ese trabajo, inclusive con entrevistas a gente relacionada a Oesterheld. Contanos un poco, Stefano.
Yeah, that was very important for me because, again, in these 10 years, he becomes an artist. Hugo Pratt becomes an artist. And to become an artist, it's very wrong to think that one becomes an artist only by himself, you know? There is always, at a certain point, someone that kind of plays a role of putting a light there in the dark and really guiding you. And that was really the role of Héctor Hermann Oesterheld. When Pratt met him right in the beginning of his work in Argentina, in a way, Oesterheld kind of taught him everything. Then it became a more complex relationship because Pratt wanted, in a way, to be an author as much as Oesterheld, but he learned all the ropes, all the feelings he learned from Oesterheld. So I think, and also there is one, for me, very touching thing that Martin Oesterheld says in the movie when he says, and I think for me that was really one of the key of the story there. He says, you know, because we're talking about the 50s, and that's the decade of joy, you know, the moment of great joy. Of course, the story, if you go further, becomes much more dark. But there, it's glorious. That's also one thing that Martin said to me in the interview. That's not one bit we kept in the editing because, of course, the movie you have to cut a lot. So he says, you know, in a way, I'm always fed up when I always have to talk about the dramatic part. There were so many good parts, so many bright sides. That's definitely the moment. So I had this question: should I really bring in the story something that happens in the 70s? It's very far away, and also, for the Argentinian audience, it's something that is very well known. But at the same time, unfortunately, outside of Argentina, it's a very not so known story, and that deserves to be told again. But the reason for me to involve that was when Martin Oesterheld said, you know, it's like in the 50s, both Pratt and Oesterheld at the same time, with the same energy, exchanging with each other, they kind of put down the rails on which they would drive their train up until the end, you know. Pratt wanted to be free, wanted to have this adventure, and that's what he really got from his life. And Oesterheld wanted to be more and more involved with social realities by depicting the reality. And this energy that they put there on the 50s kind of determined their way. And also, I must say that to me, it's interesting because I'm making a movie about Hugo Pratt that I love a lot. But what I love about Hugo Pratt is it's also, like every artist, someone who has some lights and shadows, you know? And someone watching the movie told me, oh, you know what, you should have focused more on Oesterheld because, you know, he really was stronger. He really went all the way. And Pratt was just, you know, the funny guy. And basically, as we said at the end of the beginning, when he got everything he needed, he left, you know? I said, yeah, but that is the truth, you know? Artists are complex persons. And they all bring something different into the picture. And I think for me, and that's the big freedom I have making this trilogy from the person who have now the rights on the world of Hugo Pratt, to be totally sincere, you know, on this topic and also in other topics. His relation to women could have been sometimes very, in the work of art, he was a very sensitive person. He created female characters that are so in advance in their time and still today are so incredibly open and intelligent. At the same time in life, he was at least saying frivolous with women, you know. You should take everything into play. I think characters are very important if you just put all the lights and shadows. And of course, these lights and shadows are more evident, more obvious when you put Prat and Österled together. But what a mixture. I mean, what a couple. It's Gisela Dester says that in the movie, that's one for me, one of the biggest moments in my life, just meeting her. It was, you know, I was a young artist, and I started to work with Hugo Pratt and Hector Emma Österled. What do you want more from life? You know, it's just incredible.
Exactamente. ¿Qué querés? ¿Qué más querés de la vida? ¿Qué más le podés pedir a la vida? En esa época Pratt trabajó con gigantes como José Luis Salinas, como bueno, Francisco Solano López, José Muñoz, y muy a la par de alguien que sería también su contrapunto, que es Alberto Breccia, otro gigante, ¿no? de lo que es el cómic, todos en un momento de desarrollo, y artistas que desgraciadamente ya no están más con nosotros, o los que sí están, no están publicando, porque bueno, ya tienen una edad y otra forma de ver y entender la vida, quizás. El cómic es un arte que hoy está en un plano inferior al que solía estar. Antes la historieta tenía una preponderancia y había un acceso a las historietas, a los cómics, historieta, cómic, bande de cine, fiumetto, manga, etcétera, ¿no? Había otro tipo de acceso. Desgraciadamente los superhéroes se llevaron todo puesto, pero aún así tampoco se consigue tanto superhéroe. Sin embargo, la obra de Pratt y la obra de Westergel juntos están teniendo ediciones constantemente. En este momento Fantagraphics está editando el trabajo de ellos en Estados Unidos. Aquí también está sucediendo, Los Escorpiones del Desierto se acaba de editar. Corto Maltés es un clásico que siempre está presente de una u otra forma, ya sea a través de las ediciones españolas o no. ¿Cómo es el universo en Francia, en Suiza y en el resto de Europa?
Well, it's funny because right now it's a crazy moment about Pratt, to a point that one would say that something like 26 years after his death is even more alive than he used to be. You know, right now there are 3 big exhibitions in Europe. Just before the pandemic, they had an exhibition in Lyon, Musée des Confluences, which is the biggest museum in France outside of Paris. And in one year, they had 300,000 visitors, 300,000 visitors. It's just incredible. And just right now, I have it here with me, they published the new Corto Maltese, you know, that's been reinterpreted by young artists in France. So for the first time, Corto Maltese lives in today's life, like in the beginning of 2000. And this book was a success. The first edition in Italy and in France went sold out in the first weekend. That was incredible. So, and I could go on because there are lots of activities going on around the world of Hugo Pratt and Corto Maltese. So I would say the south of Europe, so Italy, France, Spain, and the French and Italian speaking of Switzerland, their Pratt is it's a must, you know, it's like almost everyone knows him. It's very different when you go north in the countries when we speak German, where we speak English, then it's not so well known. But the most interesting thing for me is that he's alive, both by showing his true original work and by all the interpretation and all the works in which I'm part of, you know, of reinterpreting and living through. Because he created such a universe that everyone enters and kinds of inhabits in its own way, that is always constantly reinvented. You know, in the beginning, think of how fool I am. When I made the first one, I said, oh my God, you know, I'm making a movie about such a great person. If the movie is bad, I'm going to hurt his image, you know. the truth is, if I do something bad, it just disappears. I mean, the person is so great. The work he created is so strong, so huge, that whatever I do, if it's good, it can add up. You know, it's just an element that comes and builds that cathedral. If it's bad, it just disappears in a minute. So, but it is incredibly alive right now in Europe.
Bien. Vittoria, te pregunté al comienzo sobre tu acercamiento a Prat inicial. ¿Cómo te sentís hoy con Prat después de haber terminado esta aventura y ya encarando una nueva?
Yes, I'm getting to know him very well, apparently. Also through the work that Stefano is doing and that we are doing with Kong. And yes, we were in Venice recently to do some research. And yeah, in Europe, it's again very, very interesting in a way that, I mean, that period of his life, he was really well known. In Argentina, he was still a boy becoming an adult. And now he's grown up, he's famous. Everyone is interviewing him, he's getting prizes, he has got publishers all over Europe. So it's a very different period of his life. And he's traveling, he's writing, making new works, but also working a lot on the stories by reading a lot of books, by getting culture. And for example, I have a background in anthropology, and I didn't know how much work of research has been done in designing the masks or the clothes of his characters, and it's just amazing how precise he could draw these little details. And no, it's just amazing. Of course, we have now in this third episode we have a lot of materials. And I think Stefano really have to make a choice because, yes, it's just, now it's really a lot of information getting through. And we get to know a lot about him day by day, I would say.
No van a esperar 10 años para la siguiente película, ¿o sí?
No, because see, it's something I really wanted to do. You know, it's very Pratt-like. You know, every 10 years. You know, but also it was like a joke. But it takes time for me to understand the moment of his life that I'm talking. I can talk about his childhood now. I can talk about him becoming an artist. But now I have to face something that it's difficult to understand if you go deep. You know, the moment where you think that everything in life makes meaning, makes sense if you are building something that goes beyond you. And so no, I would not take 10 years because now I'm becoming old also. So I'm, you know, in a way, I wouldn't play so much with time. But no, I hope in 2 or 3 years' time, the next one will be ready to be shown. And of course in Argentina.
Esperemos que sí, totalmente, es necesario. Desgraciadamente este año, hace muy poquito, tuvimos una pérdida también muy grande para el mundo del cómic y de la historieta latinoamericana. Falleció Robin Wood, el autor paraguayo, pero establecido en Argentina a través de Editorial Columba, creador de Nippur de Lagash, Dago, Yacaró, Sabarese, bueno, una cantidad de Mi novia y yo, o Pepe Sánchez, para los que les gusta el costado humorístico, pero se perdió un grande, una persona que inevitablemente hay que comparar con Prat, porque tenía precisamente la misma metodológica y detallista precisión a la hora de documentarse, a la hora de conseguir lograr a través de su obra revivir una época y un espíritu en otros países y también yendo a la aventura, ¿no? Es otro nivel de obra, porque lo que logra Prat es sintetizar además en su completismo como artista, trabajando desde lo gráfico, logra sintetizar la imagen y el texto a un nivel, bueno, del maestro que es, pero creo que Robin Wood es alguien que hubiera dialogado muy bien. No sé si alguna vez se cruzaron, pero me imagino un universo en el cual sus caminos se cruzan. No sé si conocen la obra de Wood y tienen algo para aportar sobre esto.
No, unfortunately, I just know him by name and I have the idea of what he did, but I didn't read through. The fact is, there are so many things, and I was just reading this day a book of someone, I don't remember who it was, I said, oh, I'm so happy you don't know this book. I'm so happy you don't know this movie, you know, because you are going to discover the work. So there are lots of works to be discovered. Actually, I don't even know everything about Hugo Pratt, which is huge, the production he made, you know. And no, it's a huge world, but it's a good news.
Sí, o sea, Nippur de Lagash y Dago, ya con eso están. Que están además muy linkeadas con Italia, porque sus personajes, bueno, el de Dago es un personaje italiano, pero tuvieron ediciones por allí y son muy buenas sus obras, su obra, muy recomendable. Pero bueno, cerrando un poco, me gustaría que hablen brevemente sobre la música de la película, que es algo también muy, muy indivisible y que a Paulina, nuestra intérprete, la dejó fascinada. Háblenos un poco de eso, por favor.
Well, music I come from music, that I was musically trained, and I always love music in my movies to be really a big research again. For example, recreating a tango by Pratt, finding historical recording that really link to that specific moment. And also, of course, creating musical landscapes. I work with a Swiss musician called Zeno Gabaglio, who's a good friend of mine for many years. And I do play myself and compose myself. Actually, I would love to do more, but I always refrain myself because, you know, sometimes you are so in love with what you're doing, maybe you lose your sense of criticism. But I think it's very important for me that music really comes and just follow through. I think in many moments, maybe you don't really perceive the music is coming in, you know. Well, one of the moments where Martin Oesterheld talks about, you know, the tragedy of his family, I would say, okay, music doesn't play there, you know, because why would you emphasize that? But then suddenly, Zeno Gabaglio played his violoncello in a way, and he sent me this recording with an echo. He had this idea of putting himself away from the microphone inside of, and this distance to me was so fitting with the situation that was there that it went into the movie. So I really do a lot of research and I do a lot of work. So yeah, I could just say that music is really important, and I'm very happy if you like to underline that, because it's a very important element for me.
Perfecto. Ahora, una última pregunta para Vittoria, simplemente, en pocas palabras. ¿Cómo es trabajar con Stefano? Él no escucha.
No, it is wonderful. So, no, I mean, it was really a wonderful adventure. And yes, and then we are doing another one, and then I hope another one and another one again.
Esto es hermoso y me alegra mucho por ustedes y sobre todo por nosotros que vamos a tener la oportunidad de ver sus obras. No, Stefano, no te voy a pedir que hables de Vittoria. Sí, les voy a pedir a ambos que se despidan. Así cerramos esta charla.
Well, me voy a despedir intentando hablar un poco español y muchas gracias desde el profundo de mi corazón. Esa oportunidad de poner la película en la pantalla en Argentina para mí significa mucho y me da mucha pena no poder ser con vosotros allí, que compartir la película, especialmente con todas las personas hermosas que me ayudaron a hacer la película y son encuentros que nunca yo me olvidaré, así que me apago aquí porque si no me pongo demasiado emocional, pero fue una experiencia muy grande y que quiero compartir y, como decir, reversar, to give back a todo lo que me dieron, que es mucho. Muchas gracias por eso.
Bueno, probablemente con la próxima película puedan venir y presentar y podamos hacer justicia con esta situación que nos mantiene alejados. Vittoria.
Wow. Really thanks to everyone in Argentina that made this film possible. And yes, I mean, it was just a wonderful to be there and in that time. And I hope, yes, we can go back together with the new film in the next future.
Excelente. Ya tenemos una cita para futuro y ustedes tienen una cita para el hoy. No se pierdan Hugo en Argentina, una película, como decíamos al comienzo, importante e innecesaria. La película que busca descubrir la esencia de un artista increíble como Hugo Pratt. Gracias Stefano, gracias Vittoria, gracias a todas y todos ustedes. Nos vemos ahora y sigan disfrutando de las actividades de esta 36ª edición del Festival de Cine de Mar del Plata. Gracias.
Gracias, Pablo.